Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the beginning of the story of Job in our continuing study through the Poetic books. Last time we noted in an overview of the book of Job that there's a historical prologue at the beginning of the book. That's the first two chapters. Then we move into the central section, which are a collection of dialogues and discourses. We start with Job's three friends, where each of them has something to say to Job, and he responds, and then there's another round of responses, and then he responds again, and they sort of go back and forth, and then we get to Elihu, who is a younger fellow. He talks in chapters 33 through 37, and then God shows up, which is really sort of the climactic section of the book. Elihu is almost inadvertently or maybe knowingly set the stage for God to come, but then God shows up and he speaks and everybody else gets quiet. And then the last chapter is a historical epilogue, sort of rounding off the whole story, where the fortunes of Job are restored. So that's the whole book. We're only going to be looking in this segment in the first two chapters, that historical prologue. So we start off in Job chapter 1, verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. And we know from our New Testament perspective that there's no one without sin. There's no one truly, in the ultimate sense, upright or blameless. But the story says this man was blameless and upright. I'm not saying he never sinned, but generally speaking, he was a good man. And he feared God, and he was turning away from evil. We said the setting of the story is a place called Uz. As far as we can tell, that's located to the southeast of the land of Canaan. So this is outside the land of Canaan or Israel. In fact, there's not going to be any reference to Israel in this entire book. This story begins to develop. Verse 4, his sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their three sisters to eat and drink with them. When the days of feasting had completed their cycle, Job would send and consecrate them, rising up early in the morning and offering burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "Perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their heart." And thus Job did continually. And so he's concerned about his family. And notice that he is acting as a priest on behalf of his family. He's offering burnt offerings, sin offerings in a sense, because maybe they have sinned, and so he's interceding with God. And there's a sense in which this book is going to begin, and then it will also end with intercession, when God's going to come to Job's three friends and say, "Hey, you better get Job to intercede for you." So he's interceding here, and there's intercession at the end of the book. Now, verse 6, the scene suddenly changes. We began talking about Job and the kind of person he was and how he would intercede for his sons. And now there was a day when the sons of God, and that's a curious phrase because it's not used a lot in the Old Testament. We see it used a couple of times back in Genesis chapter 6, in that very strange thing where the sons of God came to the daughters of men and took wives, and people wonder, the old Jewish tradition says that that's angels, and I'm not so sure if it is back then, but here in chapter 1, verse 6 of Job, it does sound like it might be some sort of angelic creatures, especially when we're going to see another reference to these sons of God when we get to chapter 38. But we'll look at that then. So there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Now, when it says that word Satan, the Hebrew is actually ha-satan. Satan, we usually think of Satan as a name, but here it's used almost as a title, because ha is the word the, so it's the Satan, or the accuser, or the enemy, because that's what the word Satan means. It can mean, it's a Hebrew word meaning either accuser or enemy. And so here this enemy comes among the sons of God. Now, verse 8, the Lord said to the Satan, and I'm just going to call him Satan here, following the English text. The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" Now, notice you have God there, and Satan shows up, but God brings Job into the story, by pointing out Job. Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on the earth. And again, the judgment, not just of the author, but the judgment of God in the story, that Job is a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. Isn't that a wonderful thing to have said about you? And God says this about Job, how he is blameless and upright and fearing God and turning away from evil. Verse 9, Satan answered the Lord, and notice Satan doesn't say, well, he's really a bad guy, because Job wasn't. But he questions Job's motives. So he says, does Job fear God for nothing? Or is he just in it for what he can get out of it? Verse 10, have you not made a hedge about him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But put forth your hand now and touch all that he has. He will surely curse you to your face. And so Satan says, Job's only doing that because you've treated him well. If you didn't treat him well, if you hadn't bought him off, as it were, then he wouldn't be blessing you. In fact, he would curse you. Now, the Lord is the one who started this off, and this is the name of God. This isn't just saying God. Then the Lord, that is, the name of God, we would maybe say Yahweh. But the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not put forth your hand on him. That means, you're not to kill him. You can touch all that he has. You can't touch him. You can't do anything against him personally. But still, Satan has just been given free rein over all of Job's possessions. Now, that tells me something, that Satan didn't have free rein unless God gave it to him. So it's God who's sort of pulling the strings. We could even say there's a sense in which this confrontation, yes, Satan showed up, but God is the one who instituted the challenge by pointing out Job. And so God is doing this, and then Satan has his marching orders, or his marching permission. It's not really orders. And Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. But notice, all that he has is in your power. Now, in both these, notice, all that he has is in your power. Only don't put forth your hand. Actually, both terms, our word translated power and our word translated hand, yadaka, is just your hand. So all that he has is in your hand. Only do not put forth your hand on him. It's hand used for power in both these cases. But Satan's power is limited, and it's limited by the decree of God. Now, disaster strikes, and we're not going to read through the entire passage, but first, and Job is out one day, and a servant comes running up and tells him that the Sabaeans have attacked and taken all of his oxen and his donkeys, and that servant is there speaking to him when another servant runs up and tells him how the fire from heaven came and burned up his sheep and his servants. And while that servant is just reporting the destruction, another servant comes up and tells him that the Chaldeans have taken his camels. And while that servant is giving his report of disaster, another servant comes up and tells him that wind has caused the house to collapse in which the sons and daughters were residing, and they have all died. It's one thing after the next, after the next, after the next, and these curses, these tragic events happen one upon the other, growing in intensity until Job is now penniless and childless, which is a tragic, tragic thing. Well, verse 20, then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head. These are things that you do when you are mourning. And he fell to the ground, but then he worshipped. He worshipped God. And here's why, verse 21, he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And through all this, Job did not sin, nor did he blame God. Job recognized that the good that he had from God, didn't deserve it, but God had given him great good, and that God was still in control, even though all these evil things, these bad things, had taken place. Now we come to chapter 2, and it's almost as though we call it chapter 2, Act 2. Great place to have the chapter division. And again, we come back to the presence of God. I take this to be heaven, although heaven's not mentioned. But we have a day when the sons of God come again into the presence of God. And verse 3, and Satan's there. And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" This is almost like an echo of what had been said on the previous occasion, where there's no one like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil. And he still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to ruin him without cause. So notice that Satan had brought the incitement, that is he's only doing it for his own reasons. And God said, okay, I went along with that. And even so, he's still holding fast his integrity. Well, Satan has an answer. Verse 4, Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. However, put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. So the Lord said to Satan, behold, he's in your power, only spare his life. And so, again, the challenge goes out. This time it's not his possessions. This time it's his body, his skin. And again, God gives permission not to take his life. Notice there's still a limit what Satan can do. But aside from taking his life, it's virtually unlimited. And so Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a potsherd, that is a piece of broken pottery. Normally we know that they would use pieces of broken pottery to write. We have scrap paper today. Paper was very, very expensive. So if you wanted to do any writing, even sometimes putting a contract on such a piece of pottery, you would use that. But here he's using this pottery, this broken pottery, to scrape himself while he's sitting among the ashes. So he's still in mourning, but now he's in great, not just emotional pain, but great physical pain that matches that emotional pain. Now verse 9, his wife said to him. Now this is the first mention that we've had of his wife, and after this verse and the next, we're not going to see her again. I don't know what happens to her. She's not going to be a big part of the story, but his wife is there, and his wife said to him, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. Now that phrase, when it says curse God, is the Hebrew word barak, and it's not the normal, usual word for curse. Indeed, we usually translate Barak. We actually had a president by that name. Barak actually means blessing, blessed. So normally we would translate this, bless God and die. But every translation, almost everyone, I think there might be one that translates it that way, but almost every translation that's out there realizes that what is meant here is the idea of a cursing. And this is commonly thought in the commentaries to be a scribal emendation. And what we mean by that is that a scribe could not actually bring himself to write out this phrase, curse God, because if I'm writing it, it's like I might be doing it. And so he substituted the word barak, bless God, and die. But that what was meant was that idea of cursing. And that's affirmed by the Septuagint, that Greek translation of the Hebrew text, which does render it the same way our English did here, to curse God and die. By the way, the same thing takes place over in 1 Kings chapter 21, verse 13, where we read that worthless men testified against this person Naboth before the people, and the claim had been that Naboth cursed God and the king. But again, it's thought. Now I wasn't there, so I can't say. But it's thought that the scribes who copied this couldn't bring themselves to write it, and so they again they amended this. They put in the word blessed God instead of cursing. And I don't know. Now I have to wonder sometimes, is that a potential use of the legitimate use, just linguistic, maybe not an emendation, but maybe in rare instances you would actually take this word barak and use it for a cursing. And my answer is, I don't think so. I've searched and I haven't, outside of the Bible, found any examples of that. But I suppose anything's possible. But it's commonly thought that she's actually saying, yes, and I shudder to say it. I want to be just as careful as those scribes, but curse God and die. Now, Job, and this is why I think that cursing idea is there, because Job's answer, he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish woman speaks." Now, notice he doesn't say she's foolish. Instead, there's a bit of tact here. She says, I've heard foolish women, and you're beginning to sound like them. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept adversity? We receive all things from God. Is it just good that we receive from Him? But even those bad things, yes, we receive from Him. And in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So what he says is good and appropriate and right. Now, verse 11, we now have some new characters, and these characters are going to be with us throughout the whole center section of the book of Job. Now, when Job's 3 friends heard of all this adversity that had come upon him, they came each one from his own place, and then we're told their names. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, and they made an appointment together to come to sympathize with him and comfort him. Verse 13, then they sat down on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, with no one speaking a word to him, for they saw that his pain was very great. In counseling, I remark sometimes that these folks really had it right, at least for the first 7 days. They came and they were with him, and they gave him, I think, the blessing of their presence. Now they're going to mess it up in a minute. They're going to, at the end of 7 days, they're going to open their mouth and they're going to talk, and that won't go so well. But I just want to close here thinking about this. They came and they were with him because his pain was very great. And it seems like, at least for a time, they sat and they empathized, and that was enough. And it's a reminder to us that we have someone who can empathize with us. We have a Savior who died for us, who suffered great pain on our behalf, and who was tempted in every way that we are tempted, yet without sin. And that He knows what it's like to be alone. He knows what it is like to be in great pain, both physical and spiritual and emotional. He experienced our pain. He bore our pain, so that we need never be alone.